"Dad, can my sister come over to play?" the boy asked upon arriving home from school. When the father saw the girl, he was in shock. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the pavement as Luke rounded the corner, his superhero backpack bouncing excitedly. His eyes sparkled with an enthusiasm that only a 7-year-old could contain. "Dad! Dad!" Luke shouted, bursting into Michael's makeshift office in the living room. "You won't believe what happened today." Michael looked up from his computer screen, glasses slipping down his nose. "What is it, champ?" he asked, his mind still entangled in spreadsheets and deadlines. Luke hesitated for a moment, as if about to reveal the universe's greatest secret. Then the words tumbled out. "Dad, can my sister come over to play?" Michael's world froze. "Your sister?" The words came out as a confused whisper. "Yeah, Anna. She's new at school, and we look exactly alike. She even has the same birthmark as me." Luke pointed to the small scar above his left eyebrow. The blood drained from Michael's face. His mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. "Sure, son," he heard himself say, his voice distant. "How about tomorrow at 3? "Yay, I'll tell her." Luke ran off, leaving behind a stunned father and a question echoing in the silence. How could his adopted son have a sister? Across the street, behind lace curtains, Mrs. Peterson's watchful eyes observed the scene. She pressed her lips together, a secret too heavy to bear weighing on her chest. The clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion. Michael glanced at it for the 100th time. 2:59 p.m. His heart hammered against his ribs, a mixture of anxiety and fear growing with each tick. The doorbell rang, shrill and relentless. Michael took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. It was just a coincidence, he told himself. It had to be. He opened the door, a forced smile on his face. The world stopped. Before him stood a 7-year-old girl, brown hair framing a face that mirrored Luke's. And there it was, the small scar above her left eyebrow. "Hi, mister." The girl smiled, her eyes the same eyes as Luke's, sparkling. "I'm Anna. Luke invited me to play." Michael felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Memories flooded his mind. The day he and Claire decided to adopt, the first time they saw Luke, the joy of finally having a child. How was this possible? Michael. "Is everything all right?" Claire's voice came from inside the house, concern evident in her tone. He turned, watching his wife freeze as she saw Anna. The shock on her face mirrored his own. "Mom!" Luke shouted, running to the door. "Look, this is Anna. I told you we were the same." The children laughed, oblivious to the emotional earthquake shaking the adults. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson watched the scene unfold. Her hands trembled as she held a teacup. The porcelain slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor, an echo of the secret that threatened to break apart. "Come in, kids," Michael heard himself say, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. He exchanged a look with Claire, a silent conversation passing between them. How to deal with this? What did this mean for their family? As the children ran to Luke's room, Michael noticed a woman approaching the house. She looked nervous, her eyes fixed on Anna. "Hello," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Helen, Anna's mother. I think we need to talk." Michael nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He knew, in that moment, that their lives were about to change forever. The mystery behind the resemblance between Luke and Anna was just the tip of the iceberg. As Helen entered, the air grew heavy with unspoken secrets. Michael closed the door, knowing that when he opened it again, the world would be a different place. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson picked up the phone, her hands still shaking. "Hello, Dr. Evans. It happened." They met. Michael stared at the untouched cup of coffee in front of him, the cheerful sounds of the children playing upstairs contrasting with the palpable tension in the living room. Helen, sitting rigidly on the opposite sofa, seemed equally lost in thought. Claire, her eyes brimming with tears, held Michael's hand tightly. "Perhaps maybe," Claire began, her voice almost a whisper, "we should start from the beginning." Michael nodded, feeling the weight of memories. He closed his eyes, letting himself be transported 5 years into the past. The doctor's office was cold and impersonal. Michael held Claire's hand as Dr. Miller explained the test results. "I'm sorry," the doctor said, his voice compassionate, "but the chances of you conceiving naturally are extremely low." Claire stifled a sob, burying her face in Michael's shoulder. He held her tight, feeling his own heart break. In the weeks that followed, their house felt like a mausoleum of shattered dreams. Ultrasound pictures of friends were hidden away in drawers. Invitations to baby showers were politely declined. It was on a rainy night, while watching a documentary about children in orphanages, that the idea arose. "What if?" Claire began, hesitantly. Michael looked at her, seeing a spark of hope in her eyes for the first time in months. "What if we adopted?" she finished, her voice gaining strength. The idea took root, growing and flourishing in the days that followed. They researched, talked to friends who had adopted, visited agencies. The process was an emotional roller coaster, endless forms, invasive interviews, the anxiety of waiting for a call that could change their lives. And then, on a sunny spring afternoon, the phone rang. "Mr. and Mrs. Smith?" The social worker's voice sounded cheerful. "We have a baby boy. He's 3 months old and needs a home." Michael's heart raced. He looked at Claire, seeing his own nervousness and excitement reflected in her. 3 days later, they were at the adoption center, hearts pounding as the social worker brought a small bundle. "This is Luke," she said softly, placing the baby in Claire's trembling arms. The moment Michael saw Luke's little face, it was as if the entire universe made sense. The baby's curious eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow. A crib accident, they were told. The tiny fingers that gripped Michael's finger with surprising strength. "Hello, son," Michael whispered, tears streaming down his face. The first few months were a blur of joy and exhaustion. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, and the constant wonder of watching Luke grow and develop. Each milestone was celebrated with enthusiasm. The first smile, the first tooth, the first wobbly steps. Michael and Claire documented everything, creating albums filled with precious memories. As Luke grew, his vibrant and curious personality blossomed. He was a whirlwind of energy, always asking questions, always exploring. It was on a quiet afternoon, while playing in the park, that Luke asked the question they knew would come eventually. "Dad, why don't I look like you and Mom?" Michael felt his heart clench. He and Claire had discussed how to approach the topic of adoption, but nothing prepared him for the actual moment. Gently, they explained to Luke about adoption, about how he was special and chosen, about how love makes a family, not just blood. Luke listened intently, asking occasional questions. In the end, he hugged his parents tightly. "I love you, Kim," he said simply. Back in the present, Michael opened his eyes, meeting Helen's gaze. She looked as if she had aged a decade during his narrative. "Our story is complicated," Helen began, her voice trembling. "But I think everyone deserves to know the truth." At that moment, the sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Peterson standing in the doorway, shards of a bowl at her feet. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I couldn't keep this secret any longer." Michael felt the world spin. What secret could be so heavy? And how was Mrs. Peterson involved in all of this? As the afternoon wore on, Michael realized that the story of how he and Claire decided to adopt was just the beginning. The real mystery, the one that united everyone in that room, was about to be revealed. The silence that followed Mrs. Peterson's dramatic entrance was broken by the children's laughter from upstairs. The contrast between the innocence of those giggles and the palpable tension in the living room was almost painful. Michael stood up, helping Mrs. Peterson to sit down and quickly cleaning up the broken glass. Claire brought a glass of water for the elderly woman, who was visibly shaking. "Mrs. Peterson, height," Helen began, her voice a mixture of confusion and urgency. "What did you mean by, 'I couldn't keep this secret any longer'?" Before Mrs. Peterson could answer, The sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs interrupted the conversation. Luke and Anna appeared, breathless and smiling. "Dad, Mom!" Luke exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "You won't believe it. Anna has the same birthmark as me. Look." The two children stood side by side, pointing to identical small marks on their right wrists. Michael felt the air leave his lungs as Claire stifled a sob. Helen stood up abruptly, her face pale. "Anna, honey, I think it's time for us to go." "But Mom," Anna protested, "Luke and I were playing detectives. We found so many things in common." Michael observed the children, noticing for the first time the numerous details that made them almost identical. The shape of their eyes, the way they frowned when upset, even the timbre of their voices. "Kids," Claire intervened, her voice trembling slightly, "how about you go play a little longer in the room? The adults need to talk." Reluctantly but obediently, Luke and Anna went back upstairs, their animated voices echoing through the house. As soon as the children disappeared, Mrs. Peterson began to speak, her voice low and heavy with emotion. "7 years ago, my daughter Mary found out she was pregnant," she began, her eyes lost in painful memories. "She was young, single, and the child's father, well, he wasn't in the picture." Michael and Claire exchanged perplexed glances, while Helen seemed to be on the verge of collapse. "Mary decided to carry the pregnancy to term, but—" Mrs. Peterson hesitated, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "There were complications during childbirth. Twins. No one expected twins." A stunned silence fell over the room. Michael felt his heart race, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place in a way he dreaded to comprehend. "Mary didn't survive childbirth," Mrs. Peterson continued, her voice choked with emotion. "And I was left there, with 2 newborn babies and a broken heart. I didn't know what to do." Helen sobbed openly now, her hands covering her face. Claire approached her, offering silent comfort. "I was working as a nurse's aide at the time," Mrs. Peterson went on. "I knew the procedures, the paperwork. It was wrong, I know, but in that moment of despair, it seemed like the only way out." Michael felt a wave of nausea. You separated the twins." Mrs. Peterson nodded, guilt evident in every line of her face. "I gave one baby up for adoption immediately. The other, I tried to raise him for a few weeks, but it was too much. The pain, the memories. So, I gave him up for adoption too." The sound of something breaking upstairs made everyone jump. For a moment, the panic that the children might have overheard something filled the room. But soon the laughter resumed, and the tension eased slightly. "I watched from afar," Mrs. Peterson continued after a moment. "I moved here to be close to you, Michael and Claire. And when Helen moved in with Anna a few years ago, I knew it was only a matter of time." Michael stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the world continued as normal, oblivious to the emotional earthquake shaking that room. How could they deal with this revelation? How would it affect Luke and Anna? "Why now?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you decide to reveal this after so long?" Mrs. Peterson sighed deeply. "Because the children deserve to know the truth about their origins, because you, as parents, deserve to know, and because—" She hesitated, looking at Helen. "Because there's more to the story that you need to know." At that moment, Helen's phone rang, making everyone jump again. She looked at the screen, her face paling further. "It's Dr. Evans," she whispered, showing the screen to the others. Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. Dr. Evans had been Luke's pediatrician since the adoption. How did he fit into this story? As Helen answered the call with trembling hands, Michael looked upstairs, where the cheerful voices of Luke and Anna could be heard. 2 innocent children, playing and laughing, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The sun was beginning to set outside, casting long shadows across the room. Michael had the feeling that, before night fell, many more secrets would come to light. The tension in the room was palpable as Helen spoke on the phone, her voice a trembling whisper. Michael watched, feeling a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Claire held his hand tightly, as if seeking anchorage amidst the storm of revelations. "Yes, Doctor. Evans, I understand it will be there tomorrow." Helen hung up, her face a mask of worry. "What did he say?" Michael asked, unable to contain his impatience. Helen took a deep breath before answering. "He wants to see us. All of us. He said there's important medical information about the children that we need to discuss." A heavy silence fell over the room. Mrs. Peterson seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of minutes. "I think it's time you saw this," Claire said suddenly, standing up. She walked to a bookshelf and picked up a dusty photo album. "I always thought it was strange, but I never imagined anything like this." She opened the album, revealing photos of baby Luke. Michael felt a pang in his chest as he saw the familiar images: the first bath, the first smile, the first time Luke held a toy. "Look at this." Claire pointed to a specific photo. In it, Luke, about 6 months old, smiled at the camera, displaying a small scar above his left eyebrow. Helen gasped, her hands trembling as she took the album. "Anna has the same scar. In the exact same place." Michael felt his mind reel. How hadn't he noticed before? How had they ignored so many signs? "When we adopted Luke," he began, his voice hoarse, "we were told the scar was from a small accident in the nursery. We never questioned it." Mrs. Peterson sobbed softly. I did it. A small cut to differentiate them. To make sure I could recognize them if..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of her actions hung in the air. Claire stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Her voice was low but charged with emotion when she spoke. "All these years, on every time I looked at Luke and thought I saw a familiar trait, a gesture that reminded me of someone, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, my desire to see a biological connection that didn't exist." Michael approached her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We both did it, Claire. We wanted Luke to be ours so badly that we ignored anything that suggested otherwise." Helen leafed through the photo album, silent tears streaming down her face. "Anna, she always asked about her biological family. I always said I didn't know anything, that she had been left at the orphanage with no information. But now..." The sound of children's laughter echoed again from upstairs, a painful reminder of the innocence that was about to be shattered. Michael turned to Mrs. Peterson, a question burning in his mind. "Why did you watch us all these years? Why didn't you say anything before?" The elderly woman lowered her gaze, guilt evident in every line of her face. "At first, it was fear. Fear of the legal consequences. Fear of losing the only pieces I had left of Mary. Then, it was cowardice. Every year that passed made it harder to reveal the truth." A sudden sound of footsteps on the stairs made everyone jump. Luke and Anna came down, their faces animated. "Mum, Dad!" Luke exclaimed. "Look what we found in the attic." He held an old shoebox covered in dust. Michael recognized it immediately. It was where they kept old documents, including Luke's adoption papers. "What were you doing in the attic?" Claire asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Anna smiled, her eyes shining with excitement. "We were playing treasure hunt. And look, we found a real treasure." Before any adult could react, Luke opened the box, scattering papers across the living room rug. Among them, a sealed envelope fell out, catching everyone's attention. Helen was the first to react, picking up the envelope with trembling hands. This has the adoption agency's stamp on it." Michael felt his heart race. That envelope wasn't there when they put the documents away. How had it gotten there? Carefully, Helen opened the envelope, revealing a letter dated 5 years earlier. Her eyes quickly scanned the contents, and she paled visibly. "What does it say?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. Helen swallowed hard before reading aloud. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it is with regret that we inform you of an error in our records regarding Luke's adoption. New information has come to light that may affect..." She stopped, unable to continue. Michael took the letter, his eyes widening as he read the rest. Luke and Anna looked confusedly from one adult to another. "Dad," Luke called, his voice small and uncertain. What's going on?" Michael looked at his son, nose at the twins before him. How to explain something he barely understood himself? How to tell these children that everything they knew was about to change? Claire knelt beside the children, pulling them into a tight hug. "It's okay," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "We'll figure this out together." As night fell outside, Michael knew they were only scratching the surface of a much larger mystery. The visit to Dr. Evans tomorrow promised more revelations, more pieces to a puzzle he dreaded assembling. Looking at the confused and innocent faces of Luke and Anna, at Mrs. Peterson's guilty face, at Helen's stunned expression, and at Claire's tearful eyes, Michael felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Whatever the truth was, he knew that their actions in the coming days would shape the future of them all. With a deep sigh, he folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Tomorrow would bring its own revelations and challenges. For now, they needed to find a way to get through this night, with two curious children and a secret too big to contain. Morning arrived with a thin fog and a heavy silence. Michael had barely slept, his mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Beside him, Claire stirred restlessly, her red eyes evidence of an equally turbulent night. Breakfast was a tense meal. Luke, usually talkative, seemed to sense the charged atmosphere and ate in silence, casting curious glances at his parents. "Luke," Michael began, carefully choosing his words, "today we're going to make a special visit. Remember the agency where we met?" The boy's eyes lit up with recognition. "Where you chose me to be your son." Claire stifled a sob, disguising it as a cough. Michael nodded, forcing a smile. "Exactly. We need to talk to some people there." "Are Anna and Aunt Helen coming too?" Luke asked innocently. Michael exchanged a look with Claire. "Yes, they'll meet us there." An hour later, they were all gathered in front of the New Beginnings Adoption Agency. The building, a red brick structure with large windows, seemed smaller and less imposing than Michael remembered. Helen arrived with Anna, her eyes revealing a night as restless as Michael and Claire's. Mrs. Peterson insisted on coming down despite initial protests. "I caused this," she said firmly. "I need to be here to face the consequences." Inside the agency, the air conditioning hummed softly, contrasting with the palpable tension of the group. A receptionist led them to a meeting room where Mrs. Davis, the social worker who had handled Luke and Anna's adoptions, was waiting for them. "Please, sit down," she said, her professional tone barely masking her own apprehension. While the adults settled in, Luke and Anna were gently directed to an adjacent playroom with a large glass window allowing their parents to observe them. "Before we begin," Mrs. Davis said, "I want to express my deepest regret for what happened. When we discovered the possibility of an error, we were devastated." "When exactly did you discover it?" Michael asked, his voice tense. The social worker hesitated. "About 5 years ago, we received information that suggested a possible mix-up of records," Claire gasped. 5 years? "And you didn't tell us anything?" "We tried," Mrs. Davis replied, pulling a folder from her bag. "We sent letters, made phone calls, but the address we had for you was outdated, and the phone number was no longer in use." Michael felt a wave of guilt. They had moved shortly after adopting Luke, seeking a larger house in a more family-friendly neighborhood. In the rush of moving and adapting to life with a baby, they had forgotten to update their information with the agency. "What exactly did you discover?" Helen asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Davis opened the folder, revealing 2 sets of documents. "We have here the original records of Luke and Anna's adoptions. At first glance, they seem normal. But," she hesitated, turning a few pages. "When we compared specific details, we noticed discrepancies." She pointed to birth dates, blood types, and other medical details that, while slightly different in the records, were identical when compared side by side. "How could this happen?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was at this moment that Mrs. Peterson, who had remained silent until then, intervened. "It was my fault," she said, her voice trembling. I tampered with the records." All eyes turned to her, a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I worked here as an administrative assistant at the time," Mrs. Peterson continued, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "When my daughter died in childbirth, leaving the twins, I panicked. I couldn't take care of 2 children on my own, but the idea of separating them broke my heart." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "So, one night, I came back to the agency. I altered some records, created different backstories for each baby. At first, I thought I was protecting them, giving them a chance at a better life." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The entire story he believed about Luke's origin, about his own journey to becoming a father, was crumbling. Helen was the first to break the silence. "Why now? Why after all this time?" Mrs. Peterson looked at the glass window, where Luke and Anna were playing, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Because they deserve to know the truth. Because you deserve to know. And because—" she hesitated. "Because I'm getting old, and I don't want to take this secret to my grave." Mrs. Davis cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "This is, well, it's an unprecedented situation. Legally, we have to report this to the appropriate authorities." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "What does this mean for Luke? For Anna?" "Honestly, I don't know," the social worker admitted. "Technically, the adoptions were based on false information. But you've raised these children for years, formed bonds." Claire stood up abruptly, walking to the window. She watched Luke and Anna for a long moment before turning around, her eyes shining with determination. "They are our children. No matter what some paper says, no matter how they came to us, we love them, we raised them. That has to count for something." Helen nodded vigorously, joining Claire. "Anna is my daughter. I chose her, loved her from the first moment. I won't give her up." Michael stood up, placing a hand on Claire's shoulder. "What do we do now?" Mrs. Davis sighed. "First, we need to do DNA tests to officially confirm that Luke and Anna are siblings. Then, we'll have to navigate a complex legal process to determine the next steps." Mrs. Peterson sobbed softly. "I'm so sorry. So sorry. If I could go back." Michael gently interrupted her. "The past can't be changed. What matters now is how we move forward." He looked at Luke and Anna, feeling a mixture of overwhelming love and fear of the future. How would they explain this to them? How would their lives change from now on? "Dr. Evans," Claire said suddenly. "He called yesterday, remember? He said he had important information about the children." Mrs. Davis frowned. "Dr. Evans? The pediatrician?" Helen nodded. Yes, we have an appointment with him this afternoon." "Maybe," Michael suggested, feeling a spark of hope. "He has more pieces of this puzzle. Maybe he can help us better understand what happened and what lies ahead." As the group prepared to leave, Michael cast one last look at Luke and Anna. They were laughing, building a tower of blocks together, completely oblivious to the whirlwind their lives had become. "No matter what happens," he silently promised, "we will protect them. We will do what's best for them, always." With that promise in mind, they left the agency, ready to face the next chapter of this unexpected story. Dr. Evans' office awaited them, and with it more revelations that could change everything again. Dr. Evans' office was strangely quiet when the group arrived. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with compassionate eyes, led them to a private waiting room, larger than usual. Luke and Anna, still oblivious to the gravity of the situation, ran to the toy box in the corner of the room. Michael watched, with a mixture of tenderness and apprehension, as the two interacted with a surprising familiarity, considering they had known each other for such a short time. "Look, Dad," Luke exclaimed, holding up a puzzle. "Anna and I are going to put it together." "Great, son," Michael replied, forcing a smile. Beside him, Claire squeezed his hand, seeking and offering comfort simultaneously. Helen, sitting on the other side of the room, didn't take her eyes off the children. Her face was a mask of conflicting emotions: love, fear, uncertainty. Mrs. Peterson, who had insisted on accompanying them, seemed to have aged a decade since morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she leafed through a magazine without really reading it. Dr. Evans entered the room a few minutes later, his serious expression contrasting with his usual joviality. "Michael, Claire," he greeted, before turning to the others. "Helen, Mrs. Peterson, thank you for coming. We have a lot to discuss." He approached the children, kneeling down to be at their level. "Luke, Anna, it's good to see you. How about you go with Nurse Martha for some fun tests while I talk to your parents?" The children nodded excitedly, following the nurse who had just entered. As soon as the door closed behind them, the air in the room grew heavy with anticipation. "Before we begin," Dr. Evans said, sitting down, "I need you to understand that what I'm about to reveal is the result of years of observation and some recent tests I conducted discreetly during the children's routine checkups." "What kind of tests?" Claire asked, her voice tense. The doctor hesitated for a moment. "Genetic tests, mainly. See, for years I suspected there was something unique about Luke. Certain characteristics, certain developmental patterns. When Anna became my patient 2 years ago, the similarities were impossible to ignore." "Why didn't you say anything before?" Michael questioned, a hint of accusation in his voice. "Medical ethics," Dr. Evans replied simply. "Without concrete evidence, it's without absolute certainty, I couldn't raise suspicions that could disrupt entire families. But now," he opened a folder, revealing charts and reports. "Luke and Anna are not just twins, they are what we call mirror twins." A stunned silence fell over the room. It was Helen who finally asked, "What exactly does that mean?" "Mirror twins are a rare phenomenon," the doctor explained. "They are identical, but develop symmetrical characteristics. For example, if one is right-handed, the other will be left-handed. If one has a hair whirl that swirls to the right, the other will have it to the left." Michael thought of all the little things he had noticed about Luke over the years, things that now made sense when compared to Anna. "But there's more," Dr. Evans continued. "Mirror twins often develop an almost telepathic connection. They can feel each other's emotions, sometimes even share dreams or thoughts." Claire gasped. "Luke, he always had nightmares about being lost, about looking for someone. We thought it was separation anxiety. But Anna had the same dreams," Helen completed, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Evans nodded gravely. "That's why I insisted on this meeting. The children are developing this connection rapidly now that they are close. It's crucial that we understand and support this bond." Mrs. Peterson, who had been silent until then, sobbed softly. "I didn't know. When I separated them, I had no idea." The doctor turned to her, his expression softening. "No one could have predicted this, Mrs. Peterson. Mirror twins are incredibly rare. The fact that they have found each other, well, some would call it destiny." Michael stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the world continued as normal, oblivious to the emotional earthquake inside that room. "What do we do now? How can we help them?" "First," Dr. Evans replied, "we need to be honest with them. Luke and Anna deserve to know the truth about their connection. Second, we cannot separate them again. The bond between them is deep and vital for their emotional and psychological development." Helen stood up abruptly. "Are you suggesting that I give up Anna?" "No," the doctor responded quickly. "I'm suggesting we find a way to keep both families united for the sake of the children." Claire approached Helen, taking her hands in hers. "We can do this together. For them." Michael watched the two women, mothers united by extraordinary circumstances, and felt a wave of determination. "We'll find a way, we have to." Dr. Evans smiled slightly. "Bucket, there's something else you should know. Mirror twins often develop unique talents or abilities. Have you noticed anything unusual about the children?" Michael and Claire exchanged glances. "Luke has always been incredibly intuitive," Claire said. "Sometimes it seems like he knows things he shouldn't know." Helen nodded vigorously. Anna is the same. She sometimes draws places she's never seen, with impressive detail. Dr. Evans made some notes. Interesting. We'll monitor this closely. It could be crucial for their development. At that moment, the door opened, and the children returned, laughing and chatting animatedly. "Dad, Mom," Luke exclaimed, "we did a super cool test. We had to guess which card Nurse Martha was thinking of." Anna agreed enthusiastically. "It was amazing. It was like we could hear each other's thoughts." The adults in the room exchanged significant glances, a mixture of wonder and concern on their faces. The children already knew, or at least suspected, their unique connection. Michael knelt down, hugging Luke and Anna. "You are very special, yes, and we have a lot to talk about." As the group prepared to leave, Dr. Evans stopped them for a moment. "Remember, whatever you decide, Luke and Anna's well-being must come first. They have an extraordinary bond, something that should be nurtured and protected." Leaving the office, Michael felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The day's revelations had changed everything, but one thing was certain. The love for those children was the foundation upon which they would build the future, no matter how complicated it might be. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as the group left Dr. Evans' office. The air was thick with conflicting emotions: shock, confusion, fear, and, surprisingly, a hint of hope. Michael walked hand in hand with Luke, observing how the boy occasionally glanced at Anna, who was next to Helen. It was as if an invisible thread connected them, a silent dance of gestures and expressions that now made perfect sense. "Dad," Luke said suddenly, his voice full of childish curiosity, "why is everyone so quiet? Did something bad happen?" Michael exchanged a quick look with Claire before answering, "No, son, it's not bad. It's just complicated. We'll talk about it when we get home, okay?" Luke nodded, not entirely convinced, but willing to wait. Arriving at the Smithson house, a surprise awaited them. Mrs. Peterson was standing on the porch, her face a mask of anxiety and guilt. I brought something you need to see," she said, her voice trembling. Inside the house, after the children were gently directed to Luke's room to play, Mrs. Peterson placed a worn shoebox on the coffee table. "I've kept this for all these years," she explained, opening the box with reverent care. "These are Mary's things, my daughter, Luke and Anna's biological mother." The silence in the room was palpable as Mrs. Peterson carefully removed item by item: a worn diary, some photos, a small handmade baby blanket. "Mary always wanted to be a mother," Mrs. Peterson began, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. So when she found out she was pregnant, she was radiant, even with all the difficulties she would face as a single mother. She opened the diary, revealing delicate handwriting. She wrote about every moment of her pregnancy, about how she felt the babies moving, how she imagined their little faces. Michael felt a lump in his throat. Claire sobbed silently beside him, while Helen seemed mesmerized by Mary's words. "What happened to her?" Helen asked softly. Mrs. Peterson took a deep breath. "There were complications during childbirth. Mary, she didn't make it. When I found myself alone with 2 newborn babies, I panicked. I was grieving, confused, scared." She paused, struggling to control her emotions before continuing. "I worked at the adoption agency at the time. In a moment of despair, I decided it would be best for the babies to be raised by young families, capable of giving them all the love and care they deserved." Michael felt a wave of conflicting emotions: gratitude for having Luke in his life, anger at the lie, compassion for Mrs. Peterson's pain. "Why didn't you tell us before?" Claire asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Our fear," Mrs. Peterson replied simply. "Fear of losing the only link I had left with Mary, fear of the legal consequences, and, over time, fear of destroying the happiness I saw in your lives with the children." Helen, who had been leafing through the diary, gasped suddenly. "Here," she said, pointing to a page. Mary wrote about a dream she had. She saw the twins grown up, playing in a garden. She described them exactly as Luke and Anna are now. A shiver ran through the room. The connection between the twins, their reunion seemingly orchestrated by fate, seemed even more mystical in light of this revelation. Dr. Evans mentioned that mirror twins can have unique abilities, Michael commented thoughtfully. Do you think this, their connection with Mary, could be one of those abilities? Before anyone could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs interrupted the conversation. Luke and Anna appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mom! Dad!" Luke exclaimed. "You won't believe it! Anna and I had the same dream!" Anna nodded vigorously. It was about a beautiful lady in a garden full of flowers. She smiled at us and said she loved us very much. The shock in the room was palpable. Claire was the first to recover, kneeling down to be at the children's level. "What an amazing dream, sweethearts. Can you tell us more about it?" As the children excitedly described the dream, each detail eerily matching the description in Mary's diary, the adults exchanged meaningful glances. Michael felt they had reached a point of no return. The revelations, the connections, everything pointed to a truth that could no longer be ignored or hidden. "Luke, Anna," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I think it's time we had a very important conversation about the two of you, about family, and about some special things that are happening." The children looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Michael felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that the next words could forever change the lives of these little beings he loved more than anything. Claire joined him, taking his hand. Helen approached, placing a protective hand on Anna's shoulder. Mrs. Peterson watched from a distance, silent tears streaming down her face. "Remember when we talked about different families, about how love is what truly makes a family?" Claire began softly. Luke and Anna nodded, their gazes shifting from one adult to another, sensing the tension in the air. Michael took a deep breath. "Well, it turns out our family is even more special than we thought. You two, you're siblings. Twins, in fact." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, it seemed as if time had stopped. Then, slowly, a smile began to form on Luke's face. "I knew it," he exclaimed. "I always knew there was something special between us." Anna seemed more thoughtful. "Is that why we can feel what the other is feeling? Why we have the same dreams?" Helen nodded, pulling Anna into a hug. "Yes, honey, you have a very special connection." As the explanations continued, carefully adapted for the children's understanding, Michael watched with a mixture of relief and apprehension. This was just the beginning. There would be many more conversations, many more explanations in the days and weeks to come. But looking at Luke and Anna, seeing the joy and acceptance on their faces, he felt a wave of hope. No matter how complicated the situation was, the love they felt for each other, both the adults and the children, would be the foundation upon which they would build their future. As night fell, bringing with it the promise of new challenges and discoveries, Michael made a silent promise. He would do everything in his power to protect and nurture this extraordinary family that fate had brought together. The following morning dawned with a strange stillness. Michael woke up before his alarm, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and worries. Beside him, Claire was still asleep, her face etched with worry even in slumber. He got up quietly and went to Luke's room. He stopped at the door, watching his son sleep. Luke was hugging the teddy bear he had received on the day of his adoption, a soft smile on his lips. Michael felt a wave of love and protection so intense it almost knocked him down. Going downstairs, he was surprised to find Helen in the kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, a tired smile on her face. "I thought I could come early, to talk." Michael nodded, making his own coffee. For a few minutes, they stood in silence, the only sound being the ticking of the clock on the wall. "What are we going to do?" Helen finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael sighed deeply. "Honestly, I don't know. But I know we have to do what's best for Luke and Anna." Helen agreed, tears welling up in her eyes. They seemed so happy together. Last night, after we got home, Anna wouldn't stop talking about Luke, about how she finally felt like she had found the missing piece. Luke is the same, Michael said, a sad smile on his face. It's like they always knew, somehow. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation. Claire appeared, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Helen. "Oh, good morning," she said hesitantly. "Did something happen?" "We were just talking," Michael explained, pulling up a chair for her. "About what we do now." Claire sat down, accepting the cup of coffee Michael offered her. "I spoke to a lawyer friend last night," she began. "The situation is complicated, legally speaking." Helen paled. "What does that mean?" "It means there are no clear precedents for a situation like ours," Claire explained gently. "Technically, Luke and Anna's adoptions were based on false information, which could invalidate them." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with fear and uncertainty. "But," Claire continued quickly, "my friend also said that the courts generally prioritize the well-being of the children, and it's clear that Luke and Anna are happy and well cared for in their current families." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. "So, what do we do? Do we file some kind of lawsuit?" Claire hesitated. She suggested we consider a joint adoption. "Legally, we would recognize each other as parents of both children." Helen gasped. "Is that possible?" "It's complicated." "But yes," Claire nodded. "It would be a way to formalize what we already feel, that we are all a family now." The sound of children's laughter interrupted the conversation. Luke and Anna appeared in the kitchen, holding hands and with identical smiles on their faces. "Good morning," they said in unison, bringing smiles to the adults' faces despite the tension. "Did you sleep well, honey?" Michael asked, pulling Luke into a hug. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Anna and I had the same dream again." Helen raised an eyebrow. "The same dream as yesterday?" Anna shook her head. "No, a new one. We were all together in a big house with a huge garden. It was so real." The adults exchanged knowing glances. The connection between the twins seemed to be strengthening every day. "What a wonderful dream," Claire said, her voice soft. "First, how about we all have breakfast together and then talk a little?" While the children ate pancakes and chatted excitedly about their plans for the day, the adults exchanged worried glances. How to explain the complexity of the situation to such young minds? After breakfast, everyone gathered in the living room. Michael felt his heart race, knowing that the next words could change everything. "Luke, Anna," he began, carefully choosing his words, "remember what we talked about yesterday about you being siblings?" The children nodded, their eyes shining with excitement. "Well," Claire continued, "there are more things we need to tell you. Things about how you came to be in our families." For almost an hour, the adults gently explained about adoption, about Mary, about the mistakes and decisions that had led to that moment. They simplified where they could, but strived to be honest. Luke and Anna listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated a surprising understanding for children so young. "So," Anna said slowly, "you're not our real parents?" Michael's heart clenched, but before he could answer, Luke intervened. "Of course they are," he exclaimed. "They love us and take care of us. That's what makes real parents, right?" Michael felt tears in his eyes, a mixture of pride and relief flooding his chest. Claire sobbed softly beside him. "Luke is right," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "Family is about love, not just blood." Anna seemed to consider this for a moment before asking, "But what happens now? Are we all going to live together?" The adults exchanged glances. "We're still figuring out the details," Michael explained, "but the most important thing is that we'll make sure you two can stay together, okay?" The children smiled, seemingly satisfied with that answer for now. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, online research, and more conversations. Michael spoke with his boss, vaguely explaining the situation and requesting a few days off. Claire contacted her lawyer friend again, seeking further guidance. That evening, after Luke and Anna finally fell asleep, together, in Luke's room, refusing to be separated, the adults gathered again in the living room. "I received a call from Dr. Evans this afternoon, Helen said, breaking the silence. He wants to do some more tests on the twins, something about mapping the extent of their connection. Michael nodded. I think we should agree. The more we know, the better we can support them. Claire sighed deeply. My lawyer friend suggested we file for joint custody as soon as possible. She thinks that, given the unique circumstances, a judge will likely look favorably upon our situation. And Mrs. Peterson? Helen asked softly. Michael felt a pang of guilt. Amidst the chaos, they had almost forgotten about the elderly woman who had triggered all of this. I'll talk to her tomorrow, he decided. She's the children's grandmother after all. We need to find a place for her in this new family configuration. As the night wore on, the three continued to plan and discuss. There were still many uncertainties, many obstacles to overcome. But one thing was clear: the love they felt for Luke and Anna, and the desire to do what was best for them, would be their guide through this uncharted territory. When they finally said goodnight, exhausted but determined, Michael paused for a moment at the children's bedroom door. Luke and Anna slept peacefully, their hands intertwined even in sleep. The sight reinforced his resolve. No matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family. An unconventional family, certainly, but a family united by love and the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. Morning arrived with a soft mist, enveloping the neighborhood in an ethereal cloak. Michael watched from the kitchen window, a forgotten cup of coffee in his hands, as he waited for Mrs. Peterson's arrival. The previous night had been long, filled with tense conversations and uncertain planning with Claire and Helen. The soft chime of the doorbell pulled him from his thoughts. Opening the door, Michael was greeted by Mrs. Peterson's wrinkled and anxious face. "Please, come in," he said, gently guiding her to the living room where Claire, Helen, and the children were already waiting. Luke and Anna, sitting side by side on the sofa, looked curiously at the elderly woman. There was a glimmer of recognition in both their eyes, as if they were seeing a familiar person after a long time. "Good morning, everyone," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice trembling. She held an old wooden box against her chest, as if it were a protective talisman. Claire approached, offering a cup of tea. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Peterson. We know this must not be easy for you." The elderly woman nodded, accepting the tea with slightly trembling hands. I have something to show you. Something I should have shared a long time ago." Carefully, she opened the wooden box, revealing a collection of yellowed letters, old photographs, and a small leather-bound diary. "These were Mary's, my daughter, Luke and Anna's mother," she explained, her voice choked with emotion. The children leaned forward, curious. "Our mother?" Anna asked softly. Mrs. Peterson nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, dear, your biological mother." With gentle hands, she took a photograph from the box. In it, a young woman smiled radiantly, her hands resting on a visibly pregnant belly. "This is Mary," Mrs. Peterson said, passing the photo to the children. "She was so happy when she found out she was pregnant with you." Luke and Anna examined the photograph with fascination. "She looks like the lady from our dream," Luke murmured, receiving an enthusiastic nod from Anna. Michael and Claire exchanged surprised glances, while Helen leaned in for a closer look at the image. "There's something you need to know," Mrs. Peterson continued, her voice gaining strength. "Something I've hidden for all these years out of fear and shame." She opened the diary, turning the pages until she reached a specific entry. Mary had a special gift. She could see things that hadn't happened yet. The silence in the room was palpable. Michael felt a shiver run down his spine, remembering Dr. Evans' words about the unique abilities of mirror twins. The day before she gave birth, Mrs. Peterson continued, her voice trembling, Mary had a vision. She saw you two, Luke and Anna, grown up and happy. But ye separated. She passed the diary to Claire, who read aloud. "I saw my babies, so beautiful and grown. They were happy, but apart. I know I won't be there to raise them. But they will find their way back to each other. It is destiny. Helen gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Michael felt his heart clench, the reality of the situation hitting him with full force. When she left us, Mrs. Peterson continued, tears now flowing freely down her face, I panicked. Her vision, the idea of separating the babies, it felt wrong, but I couldn't afford to raise 2 newborns on my own. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. So I did something terrible. I used my position at the adoption agency to ensure the twins went to different families. I convinced myself I was fulfilling the destiny Mary had foreseen. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt a mixture of emotions, anger at the deception, compassion for Mrs. Peterson's pain, and gratitude for having Luke in his life. It was Anna who broke the silence. So, you're our grandma? Mrs. Peterson nodded, sobbing softly. Yes, dear, I'm your grandmother. Luke stood up and walked over to the elderly woman. To everyone's surprise, he hugged her. It's okay, Grandma, don't be sad, we're together now. Anna joined the hug, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The scene was a mixture of pain and healing, of secrets revealed and forgiveness offered, with the innocence that only children possess. Michael felt Claire squeeze his hand, silent tears streaming down both their faces. Helen watched, an expression of shock and understanding slowly forming on her face. When the hug finally broke, Mrs. Peterson looked years younger, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I'm so sorry, she said, looking at the adults. I know what I did was wrong. I'll understand if you can't forgive me. But I ask that you don't deprive the children of knowing their history, their heritage. Claire was the first to speak. Mrs. Peterson, what you did was complicated. But look at Luke and Anna. They are happy, healthy, and now reunited. Maybe everything happened as it should. Michael nodded slowly. I can't say I condone your actions, but I understand the fear and pain that motivated you. And I can't deny that I'm eternally grateful for having Luke in my life. Helen, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. I think we all have a lot to process. But one thing is clear. Luke and Anna deserve to know their story, their biological family. And that includes you, Mrs. Peterson. The children, who had returned to the sofa, watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and concern. What happens now? Luke asked, his voice small but resolute. Michael knelt in front of the twins, taking a hand of each. Now, we'll figure it out together. We'll learn more about your mother, about the special gift you seem to have inherited from her, and we'll find a way to all be a family. Claire joined him, followed by Helen. It may be a different kind of family than we're used to, she added, but it will be our family. Mrs. Peterson watched the scene, tears of relief and gratitude in her eyes. Can I be a part of this? She asked hesitantly. It was Anna who answered, reaching out to the elderly woman. Of course, Grandma. Family is family, no matter what. As the morning sun finally broke through the mist outside, illuminating the room with a golden light, Michael felt a surge of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, full of legal and emotional obstacles. But looking at the group gathered in the room, the smiling twins, Claire and Helen united in purpose, and Mrs. Peterson finally free of her secret, he knew they would face it together. The journey that had begun with a simple question, Dad, can my sister come over to play, had transformed into something much larger. It was a story of loss and reunion, of secrets and truths, and above all of the transformative power of family love. As the conversations continued, plans being made and memories shared, Michael knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter written not by fate or visions of the future, but by the choices they would make together as the extraordinary family they had become. The weeks that followed Mrs. Peterson's revelation were a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. The Smiths' house had become the epicenter of a family revolution, with Helen and Anna practically moving in as they tried to navigate the complexities of their new reality. On one particularly hectic afternoon, Michael found himself sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by a pile of legal papers, adoption forms, and medical reports. Claire was on the phone with her lawyer friend, while Helen leafed through a thick book on family law. "So the judge agreed to hear our case next week," Claire announced, hanging up the phone. "Tony seems intrigued by our unique situation." Michael nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "And what exactly are we going to propose? Joint custody?" Helen looked up from her book. "Technically, we're asking for a cross-adoption. Michael and Claire would legally adopt Anna, while I would adopt Luke. That way, we would all have legal rights over both children." "It's complicated," Claire sighed, "but it's the best way to ensure that Luke and Anna can stay together without any of us losing our parental rights." The sound of children's laughter coming from the backyard drew everyone's attention. Through the kitchen window, they could see Luke and Anna playing happily, with Mrs. Peterson sitting in a nearby chair, watching with a serene smile. "At least they seem to be handling all of this well," Michael commented, a soft smile playing on his lips. Helen nodded. "They're amazing. Last night, Anna told me she feels like she's gained not just a brother, but a whole extra family." Luke said something similar, Claire added. "He asked me if we could draw a picture of our big, happy family to hang on the wall." The tender moment was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Michael answered, immediately recognizing Dr. Evans' voice. "Michael, I have the results of Luke and Anna's latest tests," the doctor said, a tone of excitement in his voice. "You need to see this. Can you come to my office tomorrow?" After confirming the time, Michael hung up, a mixture of anxiety and curiosity on his face. "Dr. Evans wants to see us tomorrow. He said he has important results to share." The next morning, the group gathered at Dr. Evans' office. Luke and Anna were taken by a nurse for some fun games, while the adults settled into the doctor's consultation room. "What we've discovered is fascinating," Dr. Evans began, spreading charts and images across his desk. "The connection between Luke and Anna goes beyond anything I've ever seen in twins." He pointed to a series of brain scans. "See these areas here? They light up identically in both children. Even when they're separated, it's as if their brains are synchronized." "What does that mean in practice?" Helen asked, leaning in to examine the images. "Well, it explains the shared dreams, the ability to feel each other's emotions," the doctor elaborated. "But there's more. We believe that Luke and Anna may have inherited their biological mother, Mary's gift of clairvoyance." A stunned silence fell over the room. Michael felt Claire squeeze his hand while Mrs. Peterson gasped softly. "Clairvoyance?" Michael repeated, incredulous. "You mean they can see the future?" Dr. Evans made a calming gesture with his hands. "Not exactly. It's more like a highly sharpened intuition, an ability to sense future possibilities. And in their case, this ability seems to be amplified by their twin connection." "This explains so many things," Mrs. Peterson murmured, tears in her eyes. "Mary always knew she wouldn't be here to raise her children. She saw it." The doctor nodded compassionately. "The most important thing now is to support Luke and Anna as they develop and learn to manage these abilities. They'll need guidance, understanding, and above all, love." When the children were brought back, their faces were animated. "Dad, Mom," Luke exclaimed, "we did a super cool test. We had to guess which card the nurse was thinking of." Anna agreed enthusiastically. "It was amazing. It was like we could hear each other's thoughts." The adults exchanged knowing glances, a mixture of wonder and concern on their faces. In the days that followed, the family focused on preparing for the court hearing. The house was an organized chaos of documents, neatly pressed clothes, and frayed nerves. On the eve of the hearing, everyone gathered for a special dinner. The dining room table, extended to its full length, barely accommodated the group. Michael, Claire, Helen, Luke, Anna, Mrs. Peterson, and even Dr. Evans, who had become an integral part of their lives. As they enjoyed the meal, the conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by laughter and shared stories. It was as if, despite all the complications and challenges, they had finally found their rhythm as a family. You know, Luke said suddenly, in the middle of a lull in the conversation, I had a dream last night. All the adults turned to him, attentive. I saw all of us in a big house with a huge garden, he continued, his eyes shining. We were happy, all together. Anna nodded vigorously. I saw the same thing, and there was a sign in front of the house that said, The Smith Johnson Home. Helen choked on her wine, while Claire and Michael exchanged surprised glances. Johnson was Helen's last name. It's a beautiful dream, dears, Mrs. Peterson said softly, tears in her eyes. Your mother would be so proud of you. Dr. Evans watched the scene with barely concealed clinical interest. Fascinating, he murmured. The synchronicity between them is truly remarkable. Later, after the children had gone to bed, the adults gathered in the living room, each with a glass of wine in hand. I'm nervous about tomorrow, Helen admitted, breaking the silence. Claire reached out, squeezing Helen's shoulder reassuringly. We all are, but we'll face it together. Michael nodded, raising his glass in a toast. To our unconventional but love-filled family. Everyone raised their glasses, the clinking of glass echoing in the quiet room. The following morning, the courtroom was packed. Friends, neighbors, and even a few reporters, the story of the separated and reunited twins had leaked to the local press, crowded the benches. The judge, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, listened attentively as the family's lawyer presented their unique case. Luke and Anna, sitting between their parents, held each other's hands, their little faces serious and attentive. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. In my 30 years on the bench, he began, I've never seen a case quite like this. But I've also never seen a family so determined to do what's best for their children. He paused, looking directly at Luke and Anna. You two are very special, you know. Not just because of your unique connection, but because you have so many people who love you. Turning to the adults, he continued, It's clear to me that the best interests of these children are to remain together, and with all of you. Therefore, I'm approving the cross-adoption and joint custody. The room erupted in applause and tears of joy. Michael hugged Claire and Helen simultaneously, while Luke and Anna jumped up and down with excitement. Mrs. Peterson wept openly, a radiant smile on her face. As they left the courthouse, now officially a family in the eyes of the law, Michael felt a surge of gratitude and love so intense it almost brought him to his knees. Luke tugged on his sleeve, looking up with shining eyes. Dad, remember that question I asked a few weeks ago about inviting my sister over to play? Michael nodded, smiling. Of course I remember, son. Luke grinned, squeezing Anna's hand. I guess now the answer is always yes, right? Michael knelt down, hugging them both tightly. Yes, my love. The answer will always be yes. As they walked towards the future, united as a family that defied conventional definitions, Michael knew they would face more challenges. There would be difficult days, confusions, and undoubtedly more surprises. But looking at the group around him, Claire, Helen, Luke, Anna, Mrs. Peterson, and even Dr. Evans, who had joined them to celebrate, he knew they would face everything together. Because in the end, it didn't matter how they had gotten there, or how unusual their situation might seem to others. What mattered was the love they shared, the bond they had forged through challenges and revelations. They were a family in every way that truly mattered. And as the sun set on that momentous day, Michael knew they were just beginning their real journey together. A journey of discovery, growth, and above all, unconditional love. A year had passed since the court's decision that formalized the Smith-Johnson family. The autumn sun cast a golden light on the spacious garden of the family's new home, just as Luke and Anna had foreseen in their shared dream. Michael watched from the kitchen window as Luke and Anna, now 8 years old, played excitedly on the swing set he and Helen had installed the previous weekend. Their laughter echoed through the air, a melody that never failed to warm his heart. They've grown so much this past year, Claire commented, joining him at the window and wrapping her arms around his waist. Michael nodded, smiling. Not just in size, but in understanding too. The way they handle their Ungift is impressive. As if to confirm his words, Luke suddenly stopped swinging and looked towards the house. Seconds later, the phone rang. "It must be Grandma Peterson," he shouted from the backyard. "She's going to say she's bringing chocolate cake." Claire laughed, answering the phone. Sure enough, it was Mrs. Peterson, announcing her imminent arrival with the promised chocolate cake. Adapting to their new family reality hadn't been without its challenges. There were moments of confusion, especially for the children, as they navigated the dynamics of effectively having 4 parents and a very present grandmother. But with patience, love, and a lot of open communication, they had found their balance. Helen entered the kitchen, carrying a stack of papers. "I just spoke with Dr. Evans," she announced. "He wants to schedule another testing session next week. Apparently, Luke and Anna's abilities are developing in fascinating ways." Michael and Claire exchanged glances. The development of the twins' precognitive abilities had become a topic of great interest to Dr. Evans and his team of researchers. While the family was committed to supporting the study, they were careful to ensure the children didn't feel like lab rats. "We'll talk to them first," Claire suggested. "Make sure they're comfortable with more tests." Helen nodded in agreement. The dynamic between the 3 adults had transformed over the year. What began as a potentially tense situation had evolved into a co-parenting partnership based on mutual respect and a shared love for the children. The sound of the doorbell announced Mrs. Peterson's arrival. Luke and Anna raced to the door, their excited shouts of "Grandma" echoing through the house. The elderly woman entered, her arms laden with the promised cake and bags of gifts. Her face, once etched with years of guilt and secrets, now glowed with the joy of being surrounded by her reunited family. "I brought something special for you," she said to the children, after the hugs and kisses of greeting. From one of the bags, she pulled out a leather-bound photo album. "So this was your mother's favorite album," Mrs. Peterson explained, her voice soft with memory. "I thought you might like to have it now." Luke and Anna sat on the sofa, leafing through the album reverently. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and an understanding beyond their years. "Look, Anna," Luke pointed to a picture. "Say, it's Mom Mary in the garden we saw in our dream." Anna nodded enthusiastically. "And here," she turned the page, "is the house we dreamed of, the one with our last name on the sign." The adults exchanged meaningful glances. The connections the twins were making between their visions and their biological mother's past were a constant reminder of how special their bond was. As the afternoon progressed, the house filled with the aroma of coffee and chocolate cake. Friends and neighbors began to arrive for what had become a Sunday tradition, an informal gathering of the extended Smith-Johnson family. Dr. Evans arrived a little later, bringing not only his usual scientific curiosity, but also a genuine fondness for the family he had helped navigate such turbulent waters. "How are my favorite patients?" he asked, settling down between Luke and Anna. "Great, Dr. Evans," Luke replied excitedly. "Last night, Anna and I had an amazing dream. We saw a big auditorium full of people, and we were on stage talking about our gift." Anna agreed, adding, "And there was a big banner that said, 'International Conference on Psychic Abilities.' It felt so real." The doctor raised his eyebrows, intrigued. "Fascinating. It seems you two might be glimpsing your future as speakers." Michael, overhearing the conversation, felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. The future unfolding before his children was exciting, but also a little daunting in its vastness of possibilities. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the family and friends gathered in the garden for an impromptu barbecue. The air was filled with laughter, conversation, and the occasional excited shriek from the children. Michael found himself in a moment of reflection, watching the scene before him. Claire and Helen stood side by side, animatedly discussing plans for their upcoming family vacation. Mrs. Peterson, sitting in her favorite chair, told stories to a group of fascinated neighborhood children. Dr. Evans chatted with some friends about the latest advancements in genetic research. And at the center of it all, Luke and Anna, hand in hand, their faces illuminated by the setting sun, seemed both ordinary children and extraordinary beings. "What are you thinking about?" Claire asked softly, approaching Michael. He smiled, pulling her into a hug. "About how unpredictable life is. A year ago, we could never have imagined where we would be today." "It's true," she agreed. "But look at us now. Who would have thought that a simple question about inviting a sister over to play would lead us to all of this?" Michael chuckled softly, remembering that fateful day. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" At that moment, as if sensing their parents' conversation, Luke and Anna turned, smiling broadly at Michael and Claire. In their eyes shone not just love, but also a wisdom beyond their years, a reminder of the special gift they carried. "Hey, Dad," Luke called. "Anna and I were thinking, can we get a dog?" Michael and Claire exchanged amused glances. Some things, it seemed, would never change, no matter how extraordinary their family became. "We'll talk about it," Michael replied, laughing. As night fell gently over the garden, enveloping the family in its gentle embrace, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude. The path that had brought them here had been winding and often difficult, but the outcome, this unique, loving and extraordinary family, was worth every moment. The future, with all its unknowns and possibilities, awaited, but Michael knew that, together, they could face anything that came their way. Because in the end, it wasn't blood or special gifts or even legal papers that defined their family. It was love, pure, simple, and unconditional. And that, Michael knew, was the greatest gift of all.